The telegram arrived at dawn, and Fiona Carson knew before opening it that her life in Hecla, Montana, was about to end in the worst way possible. She stood in the small boarding house room she had called home for the past 8 months, her fingers trembling as she broke the wax seal. The words swam before her eyes, but their meaning was clear enough. Her employment at the general store was terminated effective immediately, and Mrs. Hartwell, the store owner's wife, had taken the liberty of purchasing a train ticket back to Philadelphia in her name. The morning train. Tomorrow's morning train. There was no request in the carefully scripted words, no room for negotiation. Just a cold dismissal wrapped in the thinnest veneer of charitable assistance. Fiona sank onto the narrow bed, the telegram crumpling in her fist. She had known this was coming ever since Thomas Hartwell's son, James, had cornered her in the stockroom 3 days ago, his whiskey-soaked breath hot against her cheek as he pressed her against the shelves. She had shoved him away hard enough that he stumbled backward into a display of canned goods, sending them clattering across the floor. The next morning, Mrs. Hartwell had looked at her with ice in her eyes and told her they would discuss her future employment soon. Now that future had been decided without her input. Return to Philadelphia, to the cramped tenement where her aging aunt struggled to make ends meet taking in laundry. Return to the city where every street corner reminded her of the life she had fled, where her former fiancé had gambled away not just his own money but hers as well, leaving her penniless and humiliated. She had come west 8 months ago with nothing but determination and the last of her savings, desperate for a fresh start in the Montana territory. Hecla had seemed like Providence when she arrived in the bitter cold of February 1884. The town was small but growing, fueled by nearby copper mines and the railroad that connected it to larger cities. She had found work at Hartwell's general store within a week, and though the pay was modest, it was enough to rent this room and save a little besides. She had begun to breathe again, to imagine a future where she was not defined by someone else's failures. Now that future was being ripped away because James Hartwell could not keep his hands to himself, and his mother would rather sacrifice a good employee than acknowledge her son's behavior. Fiona stood and crossed to the small mirror above the wash basin. At 23, she still had the same auburn hair and green eyes that had once turned heads in Philadelphia's better neighborhoods, back when her father was alive and their family name meant something. But 8 months of hard work and Montana wind had changed her. There were lines around her eyes now, and her hands were rough from unpacking crates and scrubbing floors. She looked like someone who had learned to survive. The question was whether she would continue to survive, or whether she would board that morning train and let defeat carry her back east. She spent the rest of that day walking through Hecla, memorizing streets she had come to know well. The town sprawled along the valley between 2 mountain ridges, with the railroad tracks cutting through its center like a scar. Main Street hosted most of the businesses: the general store, 2 saloons, a hotel, a bank, a doctor's office, and various other establishments that served the miners and ranchers who frequented the town. Beyond Main Street, residential areas spread out in neat blocks, though the farther from the center you went, the more ramshackle the buildings became. Fiona stopped at the small cafe where she sometimes treated herself to coffee on Sunday mornings. Mrs. Chen, the proprietor, waved her inside with a warm smile. The older woman had emigrated from China decades ago and had the weathered look of someone who had survived more than most people could imagine. "You look troubled, Miss Carson," Mrs. Chen said, pouring coffee without being asked. Fiona wrapped her hands around the warm cup and told her everything. Mrs. Chen listened in silence, her dark eyes sharp and knowing. "Mrs. Hartwell is afraid," Mrs. Chen said finally. Afraid that if she admits her son is the problem, the whole town will know what he is. Better to blame you. I know, Fiona said, but knowing doesn't change anything. The ticket is already purchased. I'm expected to leave tomorrow morning. And will you? Fiona stared into her coffee. I don't know where else to go. I have some savings, but not enough to last long without work. And who in this town will hire me once the Hartwells spread their version of what happened? Mrs. Chen refilled her cup without comment. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the street through the cafe's front window. A group of cowboys rode past, their horses kicking up dust in the dry October air. One of them, a tall man on a gray gelding, glanced toward the cafe window. For a moment, his eyes met Fiona's, and she felt an odd jolt of recognition even though she was certain she had never seen him before. Then the moment passed, and the cowboys continued down the street toward one of the saloons. That is Isaac Daniels, Mrs. Chen said, following Fiona's gaze. Good man. Works for the Double Bar Ranch south of town. Comes into town once a month for supplies and to play cards, but never causes trouble like some of the others. Fiona did not ask why Mrs. Chen was telling her this. She finished her coffee, paid, and stepped back out into the autumn afternoon. That evening, she packed her few belongings into the same trunk she had brought from Philadelphia. It did not take long. She had accumulated little during her time in Hekla. A few dresses, some books, personal items. Everything fit into the trunk with room to spare, a depressing testament to how temporary her existence had become. She lay awake most of that night, listening to the sounds of the boarding house settling around her. Through the thin walls, she could hear Mr. Patterson's snoring and the quiet crying of the widow Thompson, who wept every night for the husband she had lost in a mine collapse. These people had become her neighbors, her community. The thought of leaving them, of boarding that train and admitting defeat, made her chest tight with anger and grief. But what choice did she have? Dawn came too quickly. Fiona dressed carefully in her best traveling dress, a dark blue wool that was practical but still maintained some dignity. She arranged her hair, pinning it up in a simple style that would survive the long journey. She took one last look around the room that had been her sanctuary, then picked up her trunk and made her way downstairs. Mrs. Kowalski, who ran the boarding house, was waiting in the front parlor. The older woman's eyes were red, and she pressed a small package wrapped in brown paper into Fiona's hands. Sandwiches for the journey, Mrs. Kowalski said gruffly, and some cookies. You eat them, you hear. You are too thin already. Fiona hugged her, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. The walk to the train station felt both endless and far too short. Main Street was just beginning to wake up, with shopkeepers sweeping their storefronts and early risers heading to the cafe for breakfast. Fiona kept her eyes forward, not wanting to see pity or judgment in anyone's face. The train station was little more than a platform and a small ticket office. The morning train east was already waiting, its engine breathing steam into the cool air. A handful of other passengers stood on the platform. A family with 3 children, an older man in a business suit, and a woman around Fiona's age who looked as unhappy about the journey as Fiona felt. Fiona approached the ticket window where Mr. Brennan, the station agent, looked at her with undisguised sympathy. "Miss Carson," he said quietly, "I heard about your troubles. I am sorry." "Do you have my ticket?" Fiona asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. Mr. Brennan shuffled through papers on his desk, his expression growing confused. "That is odd. Mrs. Hartwell was supposed to drop it off yesterday, but I do not see it here. Let me check the back." He disappeared into the small office behind the window. Fiona waited, her heart beginning to pound. If there was no ticket, did that mean the Hartwells had changed their minds? Could she stay after all? But Mr. Brennan returned, shaking his head. Nothing in back either. Perhaps she will bring it this morning. As if summoned by his words, a figure approached the station, but it was not Mrs. Hartwell. It was the cowboy Fiona had seen yesterday, the one Mrs. Chen had identified as Isaac Daniels. He walked with the loose-limbed confidence of a man completely comfortable in his own skin, his boots worn but well-made, his hat pushed back to reveal dark hair, and a strong-featured face that the morning sun rendered in sharp relief. He went straight to the ticket window, pulling money from his pocket. "1 ticket to Philadelphia," he said. "Leaving this morning." Fiona's stomach dropped. Of course. The Hartwells had sent someone else to handle the transaction, probably to avoid the embarrassment of being seen forcing her out of town. But then, Isaac Daniels turned and walked directly to her, the ticket in his hand. Up close, he was taller than she had realized, with brown eyes that held an unexpected gentleness despite the hard lines of his face. He looked to be in his late 20s, old enough to have lived some life but young enough that it had not broken him yet. "Miss Carson," he said. "Yes." Fiona drew herself up, determined not to show weakness in front of this stranger who was apparently part of the Hartwells' plan to humiliate her further. "I am Isaac Daniels." He held out the ticket, but before she could take it, he said, "I heard about what happened. What James Hartwell did and how his mother is handling it. That is not right, and I want you to know that not everyone in this town agrees with it." Fiona stared at him, not understanding. "I appreciate your kindness, Mr. Daniels, but it does not change the situation. I have been dismissed, and the Hartwells have made it clear I am no longer welcome in Hecla." "The Hartwells do not own this town," Isaac said. There was steel beneath the quiet words, "and they do not get to decide who stays and who goes. But I know you are in a difficult position. No job, probably worried about how you will pay for your room and board. That is why I bought this ticket." Fiona blinked. "I do not understand. You bought it." "Yes, madam. It is yours if you want it. If you want to go back to Philadelphia, no one should stop you. But I wanted you to know that you have a choice. You are not being forced out. If you want to stay in Hecla, there are people here who would help you. Mrs. Chen at the cafe was asking around yesterday, trying to find you work. Doc Brenner said he could use someone to help with his bookkeeping and to sit with patients. Even old Mr. Patterson at the boarding house said you had been kind to him, and he would pay your room for a month if it meant you could stay and find your footing." Fiona felt tears prick her eyes. "Why would you all do that for me?" Isaac's expression softened. "Because it is the right thing to do, and because James Hartwell has caused enough trouble in this town. His mother covering for him just makes it worse." He held out the ticket again. "Take it. It is yours, bought and paid for. But before you board that train, I wanted you to know you had another option. If you want to stay, I will help you. So will others." The train whistle blew, a shrill sound that made Fiona jump. The conductor was calling for passengers to board. The family with 3 children began gathering their bags. The businessman folded his newspaper and stood. Fiona looked at the ticket in Isaac's outstretched hand, then at his face. There was no pity in his eyes, only a steady certainty that made her feel like she was standing on solid ground for the first time in days. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "You do not even know me." "I know enough," Isaac said. "I know you work hard, Mrs. Chen talks about how you always leave a generous tip, even though you do not have much money. I know Mr. Patterson thinks you are the kindest person in the boarding house, and I saw for myself how James Hartwell behaved around you. I was in the store 2 weeks ago when he was following you around like a dog in heat, and I saw how uncomfortable you looked. When I heard what happened, I knew whose fault it really was. The conductor called out again. Last call for eastbound passengers. Fiona took the ticket from Isaac's hand, her fingers brushing his. The paper was crisp and new, expensive. He had spent his own money on this, money a working cowboy could not afford to waste. I will pay you back, she said. Isaac shook his head. That is not necessary. It is to me. Fiona looked at the train, then back at him. If I stay, I will pay you back, every cent. Something shifted in Isaac's expression. Does that mean you are staying? Fiona looked at the train one more time. Through the windows, she could see passengers settling into their seats, preparing for the long journey east. Back to Philadelphia. Back to her aunt's tenement and the city that held nothing but bad memories. Or she could stay in Hecla, in this rough Montana town where a near stranger had just bought her freedom with his own money. Where people she barely knew had spent yesterday trying to find her work, because they believed in fairness more than they feared the Hartwells' disapproval. I am staying, Fiona said. The words felt like a vow. Isaac's smile transformed his face, making him look younger and almost boyish. Good. That is real good, Miss Carson. Fiona, she said. If we are going to be friends, you should call me Fiona. Fiona. He tested the name, and she liked the way it sounded in his rough Western drawl. Then you should call me Isaac. The train pulled away from the station in a cloud of steam and noise. Fiona watched it go, feeling the weight of her trunk in her hand and the ticket in her pocket. She had not boarded that train. She had not let the Hartwells chase her out of town, and she had Isaac Daniels to thank for giving her the choice. Now what? She asked. Now we get you sorted, Isaac said. He took her trunk from her hand despite her protest. First stop is Doc Brenner's office. He really does need help, and he pays fair. Then we will make sure everyone knows you are staying, so the Hartwells cannot spread lies about why you left. They walked back up Main Street together, and Fiona felt the eyes of the town on them. She held her head high, determined not to show any shame. She had done nothing wrong, and she would not act as if she had. Doc Brenner's office was on the second floor above the pharmacy. The doctor was a weathered man in his 60s with kind eyes and steady hands. He listened to Isaac's explanation, then turned to Fiona. Can you read and write clearly? He asked. Yes, sir. I kept the books for my father's business before he died. Can you follow instructions and keep calm in difficult situations? I worked retail for 8 months, doctor. I can handle difficult. Doc Brenner laughed. I imagine you can. The work is not glamorous. You would help me with patient records, keep track of supplies, mix simple medicines, and sometimes sit with patients who need watching. The hours can be irregular, especially if there is an emergency. But I pay $40 a month, and I do not tolerate any nonsense from drunks or troublemakers. If someone gives you problems, they answer to me. $40 a month was more than she had made at the general store. Fiona felt dizzy with relief. When can I start? How about now? I have a stack of records that need organizing, and if you can make sense of my handwriting, you are a miracle worker. Fiona laughed, the sound surprising her. It felt like years since she had laughed with genuine amusement. I would be happy to try. Isaac set her trunk down in a corner of the office. I need to get back to the ranch, but I will be in town again in 2 weeks. If you need anything before then, send word through Mrs. Chen. Isaac, Fiona said, stopping him before he could leave. Thank you for everything. He touched the brim of his hat, his eyes warm. You are welcome, Fiona. I am glad you stayed. After he left, Doc Brenner showed Fiona around the office. It was larger than it appeared from the street, with an examination room, a small surgery, a storage area for medicines and supplies, and an office where patient records were kept in a filing system that appeared to follow no logical order whatsoever. My wife used to handle this, Doc Brenner said, gesturing at the chaos. "But she passed 2 years ago, and I have been managing poorly on my own. If you can bring some order to this mess, I will consider you worth every penny of your salary." Fiona rolled up her sleeves and got to work. The first week passed in a blur of activity. Fiona quickly learned Doc Brenner's routines and preferences. She organized his records alphabetically by patient name, then created a separate filing system for tracking supplies and expenses. She learned how to mix common remedies like cough syrup and poultices. She sat with patients recovering from injuries or illness, reading to them or simply keeping them company. She also learned the truth about Hecla's social dynamics. Doc Brenner, unlike Mrs. Hartwell, had no qualms about speaking plainly. "The Hartwells think they run this town because they have money and connections," he told her one afternoon as they prepared bandages. "But the real power is with the miners and ranchers. They are the ones who keep Hecla alive." The Hartwells would do well to remember that. Word spread quickly that Fiona had not left town and that she was working for Doc Brenner. She saw the effects immediately. Some people, particularly those close to the Hartwells, gave her cold looks on the street. But many others went out of their way to greet her warmly. Mrs. Chen brought her lunch every day for a week. Mr. Patterson insisted on reducing her rent. Even the local banker, Mr. Fordham, stopped her on the street to say he was glad she had not let the Hartwells run her off. James Hartwell himself she saw only once, weaving out of a saloon at midday already drunk. He glared at her with bleary eyes but said nothing. His mother she did not see at all, which suited Fiona perfectly. 2 weeks after the morning train incident, Isaac returned to town. Fiona was cataloging a new shipment of medicines when she heard his voice downstairs in the pharmacy, talking to Mr. Walsh, the pharmacist. Her heart did an odd little skip, and she found herself smoothing her hair and checking her reflection in the window. When he appeared at the top of the stairs, his face lit up. "Fiona, how have you been?" "Busy," she said, smiling. Doc Brenner was not exaggerating about the state of his records. "I have been organizing for 2 weeks and I am still not finished." "But you like the work." "I love it. It feels purposeful helping people." She set down her pen. "I have been waiting for you to come back. I want to start repaying you for the ticket." Isaac waved that away. "There is no hurry." "Isaac." Fiona crossed her arms. "We agreed I pay you back every cent." "The ticket cost $22. I can give you $5 now, and then $5 every month until the debt is paid." He looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her expression must have convinced him not to. "If it is that important to you." "It is." She counted out $5 from her carefully hoarded savings and pressed the bills into his hand. Their fingers touched, and she felt that same odd jolt of awareness she had experienced the first time she saw him. "Thank you," Isaac said quietly. "And since we are settling debts, would you let me buy you dinner? As a celebration of your new position." Fiona hesitated. She knew how quickly rumors spread in a small town, and she did not want people thinking she was the sort of woman who went from one man to another without propriety. But she also found herself desperately wanting to say yes. Isaac had saved her from a terrible situation, and more than that, he intrigued her. There was a quiet strength about him, a decency that seemed rare in her experience. "Dinner at the cafe," she said, "not one of the saloons." "And we split the bill." Isaac grinned. "You drive a hard bargain, but all right. 6 o'clock. 6 o'clock, Fiona agreed. That evening she changed into a nicer dress and took extra care with her hair. Mrs. Kowalski noticed and gave her a knowing smile but said nothing. Fiona walked to the cafe as the sun was setting, painting the Montana sky in shades of orange and pink. Isaac was already there, cleaned up from his workday, and looking more handsome than any man had a right to look in simple cowboy clothes. He stood when she entered and pulled out her chair with an old-fashioned courtesy that made her chest warm. Mrs. Chen served them roast chicken with potatoes and vegetables, along with fresh bread and coffee. At first, their conversation was cautious, feeling each other out like two animals uncertain whether to trust. But as the meal progressed, they began to relax. "Tell me about the ranch," Fiona said. "What is it like working there?" "The double bar is one of the bigger spreads in this area," Isaac said. "About 5,000 acres of grazing land, plus another 1,000 in the foothills for summer range. We run mostly cattle, some horses. The owner is a man named Connor Whitmore. He is fair, pays on time, and does not work his men to death. I have been there 3 years now, and it is the best job I have had." "What did you do before?" "Drifted, mostly. Worked ranches in Wyoming and Colorado, did some bronc riding, even tried my hand at mining for a while. But I like working with cattle and horses better than anything else." Fiona sipped her coffee. "Do you ever want to have your own ranch?" Isaac leaned back, his eyes distant. "Someday, maybe. I have been saving money, but land is expensive and getting more so every year. It would take years before I had enough for even a small spread." He shook his head. "Enough about me. What about you? What made you leave Philadelphia?" Fiona told him about her father's death, about her fiancé's betrayal, about coming west with nothing but hope and determination. Isaac listened intently, never interrupting, his eyes never leaving her face. "You are brave," he said when she finished. "A lot of people would have given up." "I did not feel brave," Fiona admitted. "I felt desperate, and when Mrs. Hartwell told me to leave, I almost did. If you had not stepped in." "But I did," Isaac said firmly, "and you stayed. That took courage, Fiona. Do not sell yourself short." They split the bill as agreed, though Isaac looked pained doing it. Afterward, he walked her back to the boarding house. The night was cool and clear, with stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. Fiona found herself walking slowly, not wanting the evening to end. At the boarding house steps, Isaac paused. "I had a good time tonight." "So did I," Fiona said softly. "I will be back in town in 2 weeks. Would you like to have dinner again?" "I would like that very much." Isaac smiled, tipped his hat, and walked back toward the stable where his horse was boarded. Fiona stood on the steps and watched him go, her heart feeling lighter than it had in months. The weeks fell into a pattern after that. Isaac came to town twice a month, and each time they had dinner at Mrs. Chen's cafe. They talked about everything: their pasts, their hopes for the future, their observations about the people and happenings in Hecla. Isaac told her about life on the ranch, about difficult cattle drives and wild horses. Fiona told him about the patients she helped care for, about Doc Brenner's stories of practicing medicine on the frontier. With each meeting, Fiona felt herself growing more attached to Isaac. It was not just his looks, though she certainly found him attractive. It was the way he treated her like an equal, the way he listened when she talked, the way he seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts and opinions. He was nothing like her former fiancé, who had been charming and glib but ultimately shallow and selfish. Isaac was solid in a way that went bone deep. He did what he said he would do. He showed up when he promised to show up. And when he looked at her, she felt seen in a way she never had before. Winter came to Montana, bringing snow and bitter cold. Fiona's work at the clinic became more demanding as accidents and illness increased. She helped Doc Brenner set broken bones, treat frostbite, and care for miners who came in with lung ailments from working underground. The work was exhausting but satisfying. She continued to make monthly payments to Isaac, despite his protests. By January 1885, she had paid back more than half the ticket cost. They still met for dinner twice a month, even when the weather was terrible. Isaac would ride into town through blizzards, snow crusted on his hat and coat, just to sit with her in the warm cafe and talk. It was during one of these dinners in late January that things shifted between them. They had finished eating and were lingering over coffee, reluctant to face the cold outside. The cafe was nearly empty, just them and an old prospector dozing in the corner. Mrs. Chen had retreated to the kitchen, giving them privacy. "Fiona," Isaac said, his voice serious. "I need to tell you something." Her heart began to pound. "What is it?" "I have been thinking about this for weeks, trying to find the right words, but I do not think there are right words, so I am just going to say it plain." He took a deep breath. "I have feelings for you, strong feelings. I think about you all the time when I am at the ranch. I count the days until I can come to town and see you. When I am with you, I am happier than I have been in years. And I know it has only been a few months and maybe it is too soon, but I needed you to know." Fiona felt heat rise in her cheeks, but it was not from embarrassment, it was from pure joy. "Isaac, I have feelings for you too, I have for a while now." His face broke into a wide smile. "You do?" "Yes. I was just afraid to say anything because I did not know how you felt and I did not want to presume and—" She stopped, laughing at herself. "Yes, I have feelings for you." Isaac reached across the table and took her hand. His palm was calloused from hard work, but his touch was gentle. "Can I court you properly then? I know we have been having these dinners, but I want to make my intentions clear. I want to build something with you, Fiona, something real and lasting." "I want that too," Fiona whispered. They sat there holding hands across the table, grinning at each other like fools, until Mrs. Chen came out of the kitchen and shooed them out so she could close up. Outside, the snow was falling in soft, fat flakes. Isaac walked Fiona to the boarding house, still holding her hand. At the steps he paused. "May I kiss you?" he asked. In answer, Fiona rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, almost tentative, but then Isaac's arms came around her and she melted into him. He kissed her like she was precious, like she was something to be treasured, and when they finally pulled apart, she felt dizzy with happiness. "I will see you in 2 weeks, Isaac said, his voice rough with emotion. 2 weeks, Fiona agreed. She floated up to her room, feeling like her feet barely touched the stairs. Their courtship deepened over the following months. Isaac came to town more frequently, sometimes riding in just for an evening, even though it meant a long ride back to the ranch in the dark. They walked together through Hecla's streets, attended church services together, and spent long hours talking in the boarding house parlor under Mrs. Kowalski's watchful but approving eye. In March, Isaac asked her to visit the Double Bar Ranch. "I want you to see where I work," he said. "Want you to meet the people I spend my days with, and honestly, I want to show you off." Fiona laughed. "Show me off. The boys at the ranch are convinced I made you up since I talk about you so much. I need to prove you are real." She borrowed a horse from the livery and rode out to the ranch one Sunday. The Double Bar was even more impressive than Isaac had described, with a large main house, multiple barns and outbuildings, and pastures that stretched to the horizon. The ranch hands were a diverse group: white, Mexican, black, even a couple of Native American men. They welcomed her warmly, clearly fond of Isaac and curious about the woman who had captured his attention. Connor Whitmore, the ranch owner, was a weathered man in his 50s with shrewd eyes and a firm handshake. "Heard a lot about you, Miss Carson. Isaac here has not shut up about you for months." Isaac turned red, and Fiona bit back a smile. "He has mentioned you as well, Mr. Whitmore. He says you are a fair boss. I try to be. Life out here is hard enough without bosses making it worse." Whitmore looked between them, his expression approving. "You are welcome at the double bar anytime, Miss Carson. Any friend of Isaac's is a friend of ours." After lunch, Isaac showed her around the ranch. They walked to a hill that overlooked the entire spread, and Isaac pointed out the boundaries of the property. "Someday I want something like this," he said. "Not this big necessarily, but land of my own, cattle of my own. A place to build a real life." "You will have it," Fiona said confidently. "You work hard and you are smart about money. It will happen." Isaac turned to her, his expression intense. "Would you want to be part of that life? Not right away, I know we need more time, but eventually." "A ranch wife's life is hard, Fiona. Isolated, lots of work, not much luxury. I would not have much to offer you, at least not at first." Fiona took his hands in hers. "Isaac Daniels, I grew up in Philadelphia and I have lived in a boarding house in Hecla. I am not looking for luxury. I am looking for a partner, for someone who treats me with respect and kindness, for someone who makes me laugh and who I can build something with. You offer me all of that. Is that a yes?" "It is not a no," Fiona said, smiling. "Ask me again when you have that ranch." Isaac pulled her into his arms and kissed her with the Montana wind whipping around them and the whole vast landscape spread out below. Fiona felt, for the first time since her father died, like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Spring brought new challenges. In April, a mining accident sent a dozen injured men to Doc Brenner's office. Fiona worked alongside the doctor for 36 hours straight, helping clean wounds, set bones, and keep the worst cases stable until they could be transported to the larger hospital in Butte. 3 men died despite their best efforts, and Fiona wept for them afterward, exhausted and heartbroken. Isaac arrived in town in the middle of the crisis, bringing supplies Mrs. Chen had requested. He found Fiona in Doc Brenner's office, trying to wash blood out of her apron and failing to stop the tears. He did not say anything, just pulled her into his arms and held her while she cried. When the storm of emotion had passed, he helped her finish cleaning up, then walked her back to the boarding house. "I hate that I could not save them," Fiona said. "We tried everything, but it was not enough." "You did everything you could," Isaac said gently. "Sometimes that is all we can do." Those men were lucky to have you and Doc Brenner caring for them at the end. His steadiness anchored her. Over the following days, as she processed the trauma of the accident, Isaac was there whenever she needed him. He listened when she wanted to talk, sat in comfortable silence when she did not. He made her laugh when the darkness threatened to overwhelm her. He reminded her why she loved the work, even when it was heartbreaking. By May, Fiona had fully paid back the train ticket. She pressed the final $5 into Isaac's hand during one of their dinners. "There," she said. "The debt is settled." Isaac pocketed the money, then reached into his coat and pulled out a small box. "Then I can give you this with a clear conscience." Fiona opened the box to find a delicate silver necklace with a small turquoise stone pendant. She gasped. "Isaac, this is beautiful." "But you did not need to." "I wanted to," Isaac said. "I saw it in the jewelry store window and thought of you. The turquoise matches your eyes when you are happy." Fiona felt tears prick her eyes. "Help me put it on." Isaac fastened the necklace around her throat, his fingers gentle against her skin. Fiona touched the pendant, feeling the smooth stone against her fingertips. "Thank you," she whispered. "I love it." "I love you," Isaac said. The words hung in the air between them. Fiona's heart felt too big for her chest. "I love you too," she said. "I have for a while now." Isaac's smile could have lit up the whole territory. "Say it again." "I love you, Isaac Daniels." He kissed her right there in the cafe, not caring who saw. Mrs. Chen, watching from the kitchen, smiled and said nothing. That summer was the happiest of Fiona's life. She and Isaac spent as much time together as they could manage around their work responsibilities. They went on picnics in the foothills, rode out to see wildflower meadows, and spent long evenings sitting on the boarding house porch talking about everything and nothing. Isaac introduced her to his friends at the ranch, and she introduced him to her growing circle in Hecla. They became a fixture in the town, and people began referring to them as a couple without hesitation. The Hartwells remained a problem, though a diminishing one. Mrs. Hartwell still gave Fiona cold looks when they passed on the street, and James Hartwell had been heard in saloons claiming Fiona had thrown herself at him, and then lied when he rejected her. But most people saw through the lies, and the Hartwells' influence in town was waning as people grew tired of their arrogance. In August, Isaac came to town with news that had him vibrating with excitement. "Connor is selling off some of the ranch's south pasture," he told Fiona. 500 acres, including a creek and some good grazing land. He is giving his hands first chance to buy before he offers it publicly. Fiona grabbed his hands. "Can you afford it?" "Just barely. I have been saving for 3 years, and I have almost enough for a down payment." Connor said he would hold a mortgage for the rest at fair terms. Isaac's eyes were bright with hope and fear. "It is not a full ranch, not yet, but it is a start. I could build a small house, run a few dozen head of cattle, maybe some horses. It would be years before it turned a real profit, but it would be mine." "Do it," Fiona said immediately. "Isaac, this is your dream, you have to do it." "But it means I would have even less to offer you," Isaac said. "All my money would be tied up in the land. We would be living in a tiny house, probably just a few rooms. I would be working every hour of daylight and some after. It would be hard, Fiona." Fiona cupped his face in her hands. "Isaac Daniels, I did not fall in love with you for your money or your prospects. I fell in love with you because you are good and kind and hardworking, because you make me laugh and you make me feel safe. Because when I think about my future, I cannot imagine it without you in it. So yes, buy the land. Build the house. We will figure out the rest together." Isaac kissed her deep and thorough. When he pulled back, his eyes were shining. "Marry me." Fiona's breath caught. "What, marry me?" Isaac repeated. "I know I am doing this backward, asking before I even have a house built, but I do not want to wait anymore. I love you and I want to build this life with you. Marry me, Fiona." "Yes," Fiona said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I will marry you." Isaac let out a whoop that startled people on the street, then picked Fiona up and spun her around. She clung to him, laughing, feeling like her heart might burst from happiness. They told Doc Brenner first, and the old doctor hugged them both with tears in his eyes. "Best news I have heard in years," he said. "You two are perfect for each other." Mrs. Chen cried and insisted on cooking them a celebratory dinner. Mrs. Kowalski declared she had known all along and took credit for bringing them together. Even Mr. Patterson, usually so quiet, shook Isaac's hand and told him he was a lucky man. The news spread through Hecla like wildfire. Most people were thrilled. A few, particularly those allied with the Hartwells, made snide comments about Fiona moving quickly from one man to another. But Fiona did not care. She was too happy to let petty gossip touch her. Isaac bought the land from Connor Whitmore, signing papers that made him a landowner for the first time in his life. He arranged to keep working at the Double Bar while he built a house on his new property, with the understanding that once the house was finished and he was married, he would transition to working his own land full-time. Through late August and September, Isaac spent every spare moment working on the house. He enlisted help from friends at the ranch, and they raised a small but sturdy structure on a rise that overlooked the creek. 2 bedrooms, a main room that served as kitchen and living area, and a small porch. It was simple, but it was well built and it was theirs. Fiona visited the property with Isaac one Sunday in late September. The house was nearly finished, just needing some interior work and furnishings. She walked through the empty rooms, imagining how they would fill them with life. "What do you think?" Isaac asked nervously. "I think it is perfect," Fiona said honestly. "I think it is the most beautiful house I have ever seen." Isaac relaxed. "I want to marry you as soon as it is finished. Is that too fast?" "It is not fast enough," Fiona said. "Let us marry in October, before the worst of winter sets in." They set the date for October 15th, giving them 3 weeks to prepare. Fiona sewed her own wedding dress with help from Mrs. Kowalski, a simple but elegant design in cream-colored silk. Isaac bought a new suit and spent a week's wages on a wedding ring made by the town jeweler. The wedding took place in the small church on the edge of Hekla. The pews were packed with people who had become their friends over the past year: Doc Brenner, Mrs. Chen, Mrs. Kowalski, Connor Whitmore and Hans from the double bar, patients Fiona had cared for, and dozens of others who had watched their courtship and wanted to celebrate their marriage. Noticeably absent were the Hartwells. Fiona did not care. She walked down the aisle on Doc Brenner's arm, since she had no family in Montana to give her away. Isaac stood at the altar in his new suit, looking more handsome than any man had a right to look, his eyes bright with emotion. The ceremony was simple. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising to love and support each other through whatever hardships life on the frontier might bring. When the minister pronounced them man and wife, Isaac kissed her with such tenderness that Fiona felt tears slip down her cheeks. The reception was held at Mrs. Chen's cafe, which the generous woman had closed for the afternoon. There was food and music and dancing. Connor Whitmore gave a toast praising Isaac's character and work ethic. Doc Brenner made everyone cry with a speech about finding love in unexpected places. Mrs. Chen simply hugged them both and whispered blessings in Chinese. As the sun set, Isaac and Fiona left the party and rode out to their new home. Someone, probably the ranch hands, had decorated the porch with ribbons and wildflowers. Inside, a fire had been laid in the hearth and simple furniture waited. A bed, a table, chairs, everything they needed to start their life together. Isaac carried Fiona over the threshold, making her laugh. He set her down gently in the middle of the main room, then cupped her face in his hands. "Welcome home, Mrs. Daniels," he said softly. "Welcome home, Mr. Daniels," Fiona replied. They made love that night in their new home, learning each other with tenderness and passion. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the bed, watching the fire cast dancing shadows on the walls. "Are you happy?" Isaac asked, running his fingers through her hair. "Happier than I ever imagined I could be," Fiona said honestly. "A year ago, I was being forced onto a train, leaving Hekla with nothing but defeat. Now look at us. We have a home, we have each other, we have a future." "All because you stayed," Isaac said. "All because you were brave enough to stay." "All because you gave me the choice," Fiona corrected. "You bought me that ticket so I could choose my own path. That is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me." Isaac kissed her forehead. "I would do it again in a heartbeat." They fell asleep in each other's arms, the fire burning low, the Montana wind whispering around their little house. The first year of their marriage was difficult in all the ways Isaac had warned her about. Running a new ranch was backbreaking work. They woke before dawn and worked until after sunset, building fences, caring for the cattle Isaac had purchased with a loan from the bank, planting a vegetable garden, making endless repairs and improvements to the property. Money was tight. Some months they barely scraped by. But they managed, pooling Fiona's income from working part-time for Doc Brenner with what little profit the ranch generated. Despite the hardships, Fiona had never been happier. She loved the work, loved seeing tangible results of their labor. She loved coming in at sunset exhausted and dirty, sharing a simple meal with Isaac, then falling into bed together too tired for anything but sleep. She loved waking up next to him every morning, loved the quiet domesticity of their life together. In the spring of 1886, Fiona realized she was pregnant. She told Isaac one evening after supper, watching his face carefully to gauge his reaction. For a moment he just stared at her. Then a huge grin spread across his face. "Really? We are going to have a baby, really," Fiona confirmed. Isaac let out a whoop and picked her up, spinning her around just like he had when she agreed to marry him. "We are going to be parents. Fiona, we are going to be parents." His joy was infectious. Fiona laughed, holding onto him. "I am only a few months along. The baby should come in late October or early November. I need to build a cradle," Isaac said immediately. "And we should turn the second bedroom into a nursery. And we need to make sure we have enough money saved for Doc Brenner's fee. And—" "Isaac," Fiona said, touching his face. "We have months. We will figure it all out." Over the summer, as Fiona's belly swelled, they prepared for the baby. Isaac built a beautiful cradle from wood he carefully selected and sanded smooth. Fiona sewed tiny clothes and blankets. Friends from town and the ranch gave them advice and hand-me-down items their own children had outgrown. Doc Brenner monitored Fiona's pregnancy carefully, refusing to accept payment for his services. "You worked for me for over a year," he said when Fiona protested. "Consider this payment for all those times you stayed late or came in on your day off." The baby came on a cold night in early November. Fiona's labor was long and difficult, lasting nearly 20 hours. Isaac stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth, whispering encouragement. Doc Brenner delivered a healthy baby boy in the early hours of the morning. He placed the squalling infant on Fiona's chest, and she stared down at her son in wonder. "He is perfect," she whispered. Isaac, tears streaming down his face, touched the baby's tiny hand. The infant immediately gripped his finger and Isaac let out a choked laugh. "He is so small." "He is strong," Doc Brenner said. 10 fingers, 10 toes, good lungs, you have a healthy son." They named him Thomas, after Fiona's father. Little Tommy had his mother's auburn hair and his father's brown eyes. He was a good baby, relatively calm and easy, though he kept them up many nights with his crying. Fiona adjusted to motherhood with more difficulty than she expected. She loved Tommy desperately, but the constant demands of caring for an infant while also trying to maintain the ranch work exhausted her. There were days when she felt like she was drowning. Isaac noticed and stepped up without being asked. He took over the night feedings when he could, walking Tommy around the house while crooning off key lullabies. He hired a young woman from town, a miner's daughter named Sarah, to come help Fiona a few days a week with housework and watching the baby so Fiona could rest. "You do not have to do everything alone," Isaac told her one night when she broke down crying from exhaustion. "We are partners, remember? Let me help." His support made all the difference. By the time Tommy was 6 months old, Fiona had found her rhythm. She learned to accomplish tasks one-handed while holding the baby, learned to sleep when Tommy slept, learned to ask for help when she needed it. The ranch was doing better financially. Their first year they had barely broken even, but their second year showed a modest profit. Isaac was able to pay down some of the bank loan and even buy a few more head of cattle. They were not wealthy by any stretch, but they were stable. In the summer of 1887, Connor Whitmore offered to sell Isaac another 200 acres adjacent to his current property. Isaac agonized over the decision, worried about taking on more debt, but Fiona encouraged him to do it. "The ranch is growing," she said. We need more grazing land, and Connor is giving you fair terms. We can make this work." Isaac bought the land and their ranch grew to 700 acres. It was still small compared to the big outfits, but it was theirs, built with their own hands and determination. That fall, Fiona realized she was pregnant again. This time the news came with less surprise and more practical consideration. They now knew what to expect, what they needed, how to manage. Their second child, a daughter they named Grace, was born in May 1888. She had her father's dark hair and her mother's green eyes, and she was far more demanding than Tommy had been. She cried frequently, slept poorly, and seemed to need constant attention. "She knows what she wants," Isaac said one night, bouncing the screaming infant while Fiona tried to catch a few hours of sleep. "That is going to serve her well someday." Despite the challenges, their family was happy. Tommy adored his baby sister, always wanting to help care for her. Isaac was a devoted father, patient and loving even when exhausted. And Fiona, watching her husband play with their children or seeing her son carefully share a toy with his sister, felt her heart overflow with love. The ranch continued to grow. By 1889, they had expanded to over 1,000 acres and ran nearly 200 head of cattle. Isaac hired 2 hands to help with the work, young men who lived in a bunkhouse Isaac had built near the barn. The extra help made an enormous difference, allowing Isaac to focus on management and planning rather than just endless physical labor. Fiona still worked part-time for Doc Brenner, bringing the children with her, or leaving them with Sarah when the work required her full attention. She loved maintaining that connection to the town and to the medical work that had saved her when she had nowhere else to turn. In 1890, Montana achieved statehood. Hecla celebrated with a parade and festivities, and the Daniels family attended together. Tommy, now nearly 4 years old, rode on his father's shoulders and waved a small flag. 2-year-old Grace clapped her hands at the music. Fiona walked beside Isaac, holding his hand, marveling at how much had changed in the 6 years since she had nearly boarded that train east. Life was not perfect. There were still hard years when weather or market prices hurt their income. There were still long hours and backbreaking work. Grace came down with scarlet fever when she was 3, and Fiona spent a week barely sleeping, terrified she would lose her daughter. But Grace recovered and life went on. In 1892, Fiona realized she was pregnant for a 3rd time. She was 31 now, and this pregnancy felt different from the others. She was more tired, more uncomfortable. Doc Brenner monitored her carefully, concerned about her age and the difficult time she had delivering Grace. Their 3rd child, another boy they named Samuel, was born in January 1893. The delivery was complicated, and for a few terrifying hours, Doc Brenner was not sure both mother and baby would survive. But Fiona, stubborn as always, fought through, and Samuel came into the world wailing his displeasure at the cold Montana winter. "No more," Doc Brenner told Isaac and Fiona firmly. 3 healthy children is a blessing. Another pregnancy could kill her. Fiona, exhausted and sore but holding her new son, nodded. 3 is enough. Our family is complete." Isaac kissed her forehead. 3 is perfect." Life with 3 children was chaos, but it was joyful chaos. Tommy, now 6, helped care for his younger siblings with a seriousness that made Fiona's heart ache with love. Grace, at 4, was as headstrong and demanding as ever, but also fiercely protective of baby Samuel. And Samuel himself was a placid, happy baby who seemed content to watch the world with curious eyes. The ranch thrived through the 1890s. Isaac proved to have a gift for breeding cattle, developing a reputation for quality stock. Ranchers from across Montana, and even from neighboring territories, came to buy his cattle. The income allowed them to improve the house, adding 2 more bedrooms and a proper kitchen. They installed a pump for water, bought better furniture, and even splurged on a piano for Fiona, who had learned to play as a girl. In 1895, Mrs. Hartwell died suddenly of a heart ailment. The funeral was well attended because she had been a prominent figure in Hecla, but few people mourned her sincerely. James Hartwell, still unmarried and still drinking too much, sold the general store within 6 months and left Montana for California. No one was sorry to see him go. Fiona felt no triumph at their departure, only a quiet relief that a difficult chapter was finally closed. She had built a life far better than anything the Hartwells could have imagined for her, and that was victory enough. The children grew. Tommy proved to be a natural with animals, spending hours helping his father with the cattle and horses. Grace, true to her demanding nature, declared at age 8 that she wanted to be a doctor like Doc Brenner. Fiona began teaching her to read medical texts, and Grace absorbed the knowledge like a sponge. Samuel was quieter than his siblings, but he had a gentle wisdom that made people trust him instinctively. In 1899, Doc Brenner suffered a stroke that left him partially paralyzed. Fiona took over more of his practice, with the old doctor supervising and advising from his wheelchair. Grace, now 11, helped as much as she could, showing a real aptitude for medical work. The new century arrived with celebrations in Hecla and across the nation. The Daniels family rang in 1900 together, gathered around their fireplace. Isaac raised a glass of cider. "To the new century," he said, "and to the best 16 years of my life. Every single day with you, Fiona, has been a gift." Fiona, gray threading through her auburn hair now but eyes still bright, smiled at him. "To the cowboy who bought me a ticket home but gave me the choice to stay. Best decision I ever made." Their children, who had heard the story many times, smiled at their parents' obvious affection. The early years of the new century brought more changes. In 1902, Doc Brenner passed away peacefully in his sleep. He left his practice and all his equipment to Fiona with a note that said simply, "You were always meant to do this work. Make me proud." Fiona, now 41, took over as Hecla's primary medical practitioner. She was not a formally trained doctor, but she had 15 years of experience working alongside Doc Brenner, and the people of Hecla trusted her. Grace, now 14, worked as her assistant, already showing the skill and dedication that would make her a fine doctor someday. Tommy, at 16, took over more responsibility for the ranch. He had his father's steady temperament and a natural gift for the work. Isaac began teaching him the business side of ranching, preparing him to eventually take over. Samuel, at 10, was the family surprise. He showed no interest in ranching or medicine. Instead, he loved books and learning. Isaac and Fiona arranged for him to attend school in Butte, boarding with a family there during the school year and returning home for summers. It was hard having him gone, but they wanted him to have opportunities they had never had. In 1905, tragedy struck when a barn fire killed several of their horses and destroyed the main barn. The loss was devastating, both emotionally and financially. But the community that had supported Fiona 20 years earlier rallied again. Neighbors came to help rebuild. Connor Whitmore, now in his 70s, donated lumber. Even people from neighboring ranches pitched in. Within 2 months, they had a new barn, larger and better built than the old one. Isaac stood looking at it one evening, Fiona beside him. "We could not have done this alone," he said. "We have never been alone," Fiona replied. "Not since the day you bought me that train ticket." Isaac pulled her close. They stood together, watching the sun set over their ranch, their life, their legacy. The years continued to roll forward. Tommy married a rancher's daughter named Elizabeth in 1908, and they built a house on the far end of the ranch property. In 1909, they had a son, making Isaac and Fiona grandparents for the first time. Fiona held her grandson, Daniel, and marveled at the continuation of the life she and Isaac had built. Grace left for medical school in Chicago in 1910, one of the few women accepted to the program. She wrote home regularly, filled with excitement about her studies. Fiona saved every letter, proud beyond words. Samuel proved to be a brilliant scholar. He earned a scholarship to college and eventually became a teacher, returning to Montana to work in the public schools, determined to bring education to rural communities. In 1914, Isaac turned 50. He was still strong and capable, but the years of hard work had taken their toll. His joints ached in cold weather, and he tired more easily than he once had. But he was content. His ranch was successful, his children were thriving, and he still woke up every morning next to the woman he loved. Fiona, at 53, had gray hair and lines around her eyes, but she was still the same woman who had refused to board that train 30 years ago. She still worked as Hecla's medical practitioner, still fought for her patients with the same determination she had always shown. One evening that summer, they sat on their porch watching the sun set. It was their favorite time of day, when the work was done and they could simply be together. "You ever regret it?" Isaac asked. "Staying here instead of going back to Philadelphia?" Fiona looked at him in surprise. "Not for a single second. Why would you ask that? I just want to make sure you are happy, that this life, this hard, isolated life, has been enough for you." Fiona took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "Isaac, you gave me everything when you bought that train ticket. You gave me choice, dignity, respect. You gave me love and partnership. You gave me this ranch, our children, our grandchildren. You gave me a life beyond anything I dreamed possible when I was standing on that train platform, scared and alone. How could I regret any of it?" Isaac raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I love you, Fiona Daniels. I have loved you from the first moment I saw you through Mrs. Chen's cafe window." "I love you too," Fiona said. "Every day, more than I can say." They sat together as the sky faded from orange to purple to deep blue, as stars began to appear one by one, as the night sounds of the ranch rose around them. They had built this life together, from nothing, with determination and love and faith in each other. In 1916, Grace returned to Montana with her medical degree, becoming one of the first female doctors in the state. She took over Fiona's practice, allowing her mother to finally retire. Fiona, at 55, found retirement suited her. She had more time to spend with Isaac, with their growing brood of grandchildren, with the garden she had always wanted but never had time to properly tend. The world changed around them. The Great War came and went, touching even remote Montana. Samuel enlisted despite his parents' fears, served as a medic in France, and returned home in 1919, forever changed by what he had seen. But he resumed his teaching work, channeling his experiences into making sure his students understood the cost of war. Through it all, Isaac and Fiona remained constants for each other and their family. They celebrated anniversaries and birthdays, mourned losses, welcomed new grandbabies. The ranch passed to Tommy's management as Isaac officially retired in 1920, though he still walked the property every day and offered advice when asked. In 1924, Hecla threw a party celebrating Isaac and Fiona's 40th wedding anniversary. It seemed like the whole town turned out, along with family and friends from across Montana. Tommy gave a speech about his parents' love story, about how his mother had been told to leave on the morning train, but his father had bought her a ticket home instead, giving her the freedom to choose her own path. And she chose to stay, Tommy said, his voice thick with emotion. She chose to build a life here, with our father, with all of us. Every good thing in my life exists because my mother was brave enough to stay, and my father was wise enough to love her. Isaac and Fiona danced to piano music, moving slowly across the floor they had danced on at their wedding reception 4 decades earlier. Isaac might be 70 now, his hair white and his body stiff, but when he looked at Fiona, his eyes still held the same love she had seen that first time in Mrs. Chen's cafe. "Still happy you stayed," he murmured as they swayed together. "Still happy," Fiona confirmed. "Every single day." The late 1920s brought prosperity to the ranch and the region. Tommy expanded the operation, and the family's reputation for quality cattle brought buyers from across the country. Grace's medical practice thrived, and she trained younger doctors, paying forward the education Doc Brenner had given Fiona. Samuel became a principal, shaping education policy for rural Montana schools. Isaac and Fiona settled into their 70s with Grace. They spent their days on the porch, in the garden, visiting with grandchildren and great-grandchildren. They took walks along the creek where Isaac had first told Fiona he loved her. They sat by the fire on cold nights, holding hands and remembering. In 1932, Montana, like the rest of the country, was deep in the Depression. The ranch struggled, as did most agricultural operations. But the Daniels family had been through hard times before. They tightened their belts, helped their neighbors, and survived. Isaac's health began to fail in 1933. His heart was weak, the doctor told them. There was not much to be done except rest and try to stay comfortable. Isaac, who had worked every day of his life since he was old enough to hold a rope, found rest difficult. But Fiona stayed by his side, reading to him, talking with him, simply being present. "I am not afraid," Isaac told her one afternoon as they sat on the porch. He was 79 now, frail in a way that broke Fiona's heart. "I have had a good life, Fiona, better than I ever deserved." "You deserve everything good that has ever happened to you," Fiona said fiercely. "You are the best man I have ever known." "I was lucky," Isaac said. "Lucky that you stood on that train platform 49 years ago. Lucky that I was brave enough to approach you. Lucky that you chose to stay." "I was the lucky one," Fiona whispered. Isaac died peacefully in his sleep in November 1933, Fiona beside him in the bed they had shared for 48 years. The funeral was one of the largest Hecla had ever seen. People came from across Montana to pay their respects to a man who had been respected for his integrity, his hard work, and his devotion to his family. Fiona grieved deeply but not bitterly. She had loved Isaac for nearly 50 years, and that love had never wavered. She missed him with an ache that never fully went away, but she did not regret a single day they had spent together. She lived on in the ranch house, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Grace checked on her daily. Tommy made sure she had everything she needed. Samuel visited whenever he could. They all worried about her living alone, but Fiona insisted she was fine. "This house holds 50 years of memories," she told them. "I am not ready to leave it yet." She spent her days tending her garden, reading and writing in a journal she had kept since her marriage. She recorded stories of her life with Isaac, wanting future generations to know the man who had changed her life by buying her a train ticket home instead of forcing her to use it. In the spring of 1935, Fiona was working in her garden when she felt a sharp pain in her chest. She sat down on the bench Isaac had built for her decades ago, pressing a hand to her heart. The pain faded, and she took a deep breath of Montana air. She looked around at the ranch Isaac had built, at the mountains in the distance, at the house where they had raised their children. She thought about that morning 49 years ago when she had stood on the train platform, defeated and scared, certain her life was over. Instead, it had been beginning. Grace found her an hour later, still sitting on the bench, a peaceful smile on her face. Fiona Carson Daniels had died as she had lived for nearly 50 years. At home, surrounded by the beauty of the land she and Isaac had made their own. They buried her next to Isaac on a hill overlooking the ranch. The whole family gathered, 3 generations of Daniels who existed because one cowboy had bought a woman a train ticket home, giving her the freedom to choose her own destiny. Tommy stood at his parents' graves and told his children and grandchildren the story one more time. About how his mother had been told to leave on the morning train. About how his father had bought her ticket instead, but gave her the choice to stay. About how that single act of kindness and respect had changed everything, creating a legacy of love that stretched across 5 decades and would continue long into the future. Remember them, Tommy told the assembled family. Remember what they built together and why. Remember that love and respect and partnership can overcome anything. That is the legacy they left us. The family stood together on that Montana hillside, the wind whipping around them, the land stretching out below. They carried Fiona and Isaac's story in their hearts, a reminder of what was possible when 2 people chose each other and built a life with determination, faith, and love. The ranch continued under Tommy's management, then passed to his son Daniel. Grace's medical practice became a clinic that served the region for generations. Samuel's educational reforms improved schools across rural Montana. The family Isaac and Fiona created spread and grew, each generation carrying forward the values their great-grandparents had lived by. And in Hecla, Montana, people still told the story of Fiona Carson and Isaac Daniels, how she was told to leave on the morning train, and how he bought her ticket home instead, giving her the freedom to choose. How she chose to stay, and how they built a life together that became legendary in its own right. It was a story about courage and kindness, about second chances and choosing your own path. But most of all, it was a love story, set against the rough beauty of the Montana territory, about 2 people who found each other when both needed it most, and who spent 50 years proving that sometimes the greatest adventures begin not with leaving, but with staying. In the end, that was Fiona and Isaac's true legacy. Not just the ranch or the family or the contributions they made to their community, but the simple, powerful truth that love, when built on respect and partnership and genuine care, could transform lives and echo through generations. The morning train still ran through Hecla, carrying passengers east and west to beginnings and endings. But for Fiona and Isaac, that train represented something else entirely. The moment when everything could have ended, but instead, everything began. The moment when a cowboy bought a woman her freedom, and she chose to use that freedom to build a life with him. That choice, made on a Montana train platform on an October morning in 1884, rippled forward through time, creating a family, a legacy, and a love story that would be remembered long after the last whistle of that morning train faded into history.